All right, welcome back, everybody. Really glad to be here with all of you, including all of the listeners that have been listening in and connecting as we've been exploring these conversations. And what I wanted to do is just kick us off with just introducing again what we're doing here. We all live in conversation. We live in dialogue. It's a unique gift that we have as human beings, this very nuanced capacity to articulate and be with one another in a linguistic way. And we all take on various conversational patterns, whether we're having a debate, whether we're in a circle listening to each other's feelings and experiences. There's always these implicit patterns that are a part of the way that we dialogue. And what we're wanting to do is shine light on that and explore a different kind of dialogue. We might call it an emergent dialogue. It's almost like a shared meditation, but our eyes are open and we're exploring content, which is a little different than typical meditation. But we're doing it together and we're connecting in with the field that we're in together and allowing that field to move us. So that rather than coming from a place of what we already know and sort of presenting something that anybody on this call could do, and likely many, many of the people that listen to these conversations could do, there's more of an interest in letting that go and connecting in with each other and allowing the mystery to move us into an exploration that goes beyond what we're already consciously aware of. And so that's what we're going to explore together. And so maybe as a group, including all the listeners, we could just drop in together as a starting point. And just feeling the quality of presence that's here when humans gather. Feeling that sacredness of connection. That spaciousness and also there's an invitation here to then, within that spacious ground, to lean in with our hearts to an emergent potential that's between us, something alive that responds to our attention and our care for emergence. So with that said, I'll pass it over to Lonny to introduce our topic.
Yes, so I was a student of Leon Hammer's for many years and later a friend till the end of his life. And just a couple months before Leon died, 2 weeks before his 99th birthday, we had our last conversation. About an hour and a half Zoom call. And Leon was looking over his life. And he talked about his transition from psychoanalysis and psychiatry into practicing Chinese medicine. He had been sort of at the forefront of the humanist psychology movement, prescribing LSD to his patients in the early 1960s until it became illegal. And he was a student of Alexander Lowen's, the founder of bioenergetics, and he was slated to take over that tradition, and he walked away from it to go into Chinese medicine. He felt that after losing the ability to prescribe LSD to his patients, that Chinese medicine, that acupuncture needles in particular, produced the most instantaneous cessation of repression that he had experienced therapeutically with people. And he went into China, left analysis and the bioenergetics work because he had the revelation that healers had always touched their patients. and that needles were a way to do that. And he made the statement, which we didn't have the time to go into deeply there, but he made the statement to me that one of the reasons he became disillusioned with psychoanalysis is he had come to the conclusion the idea of clinical resistance was a farce and didn't actually really exist and was a hoax perpetrated on the public for the sake of psychoanalysts making money and prolonging treatment. And I asked him about that, and his fundamental statement was that everything that appears as resistance clinically responds to love and can't not respond to sincere love sustained over time. And that really there is no such thing as resistance because every soul wants to be met and everything capitulates. Everything called resistance capitulates to love in time. And that just intrigued me. And Alexander Laurie and I were meeting over the summer, and I threw that out as a topic. I certainly have written a lot about clinical resistance and how to use Chinese medicine to address it. I just taught a 10-month shadow resolution workshop. And I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm sure we all do, and I'm sure all of us here in this discussion group have prior thoughts and knowledge about it and attitudes, and I'm sure everybody listening does. But the thing about intersubjective discussions that's so beautiful is we can bring anything to it, drop the known, put it out on the table, then look into our experience and just see what emerges around it. So I thought it would be, a very interesting topic to throw out. We have all these treatments in Chinese medicine to resolve stagnation and all this stuff that's in the way. And the question, I guess, is anything in the way? So that's the background and the context for this discussion. And I'm really interested to see where we'll all go with it.
In this emergent dialogue, I have to open my heart and feel you all. And so the idea of resistance is an idea, and it's not here in the field. And so I have the inner experience, and then I have the shared outer experience, and I ask, what is resistance? Is there resistance? And I don't find it right now.
Yeah, it brings up for me the curiosity around when we experience a boundary. It's a similar question. What's resistance? What's a boundary? When we find something that's something we can touch, what is that? You're muted, Lorie.
Oh, I thought you were.
I'm resisting. No, I was actually
Thought you were casting spells or something.
yeah. But that sense, when you said that, Alexander, that it's something you can touch. Because what came to me is that resistance can only be a shared experience. So it's not just the patient who's resisting, but what am I resisting? Because if I feel into that question, generally when I get to those places with a person, if I can not like, oh, I have to break through this, or or there's something wrong, but I can just get close in and kind of sit next to it. It's about, can I bear being present to what's being protected, or what's being held until the time is right, or the resources are available. Yeah, let's say that for now.
So then the resistance becomes a shared experience in the field. So the boundary, this that we might be sensing and coming up against, it's no longer just the patient's resistance. And so going back to Lonny's discussion with Leon, that love penetrates all. And so if we're truly rooted in spirit with another, and we are sitting and bearing the pain of the resistance that they've carried, and we sense into that and take that on because we're rooted in spirit, that our own fire, our own love melts it if they allow it.
Yeah, there's something that comes that, as you're speaking about it, what comes up for me is, as the practitioner, the ego structure around wanting or needing or having to be the one who makes the difference, as opposed, especially early in clinical practice, because then we're still gaining, then we're still not really sure if we've just been hypnotized into a whole way of thought and a whole worldview that actually is just a complete illusion. But I think, my experience is moving into the soul's view. There's a letting go of that as I've let go of that structure of needing to be the one and happy to be there in the mystery with the patient in that field of care and love, allowing for the unfolding in their own time, even if it isn't in this lifetime, that lack of push, that lack of ego affirmation on my part softens things for them. In a way, it creates a much easier flow. Creates a deeper context of care.
Yeah, what comes up for me is, in the context of what you were saying that Leon was sharing, that like love melts it, but what's also coming up as this conversation is unfolding is, there's also the possibility to experience the resistance that's in the patient as love. It's already an expression of love. That what seems like resistance and a kind of protective shutting down is enlightened intention at a deeper level that sort of went off the rails, or was very effective for, the first 10 years of somebody's life, and then it just became stuck there. But some way in which that the resistance itself is already a manifestation of love.
And it's very much something that I, just like Randine was saying earlier, and yeah, in general, I'm with Leon Hammer's statement there. But the resistance for me is primarily, it is something that I feel. It's not so much that the patient is in a state of resistance. It's more that I feel like my own heart at that moment is not open enough to create a space or a field where things are easy and where things can be transformed. Like as we all know, in Chinese medicine, we've got the heavy dew in the spring and autumn. Said it's this Confucian text that there is two centers in the cosmic map, and though they are the winter solstice and the summer solstice, and in the microcosm of the human being, it's the gallbladder and the heart. So the heart is that which loves, but the gallbladder is the harmonizer. What's the harmonization? Is our ability to react at any given point to new temperature, weather changes, different smell, different language, different culture, different thought patterns, viruses, whatever it is, this ability to, in a very flexible and heart open way, that we can say, bring it on. I'm adjusting to this different field. It's fun to be in this reactive space where my flexibility is tested by having somebody who's in a different place than myself at that time. And so I always experience that. When I feel there's resistance, I'm having a bad day somehow, because it's I feel this resistance, but it's really something that's occurring inside of myself, because something in my quote unquote gallbladder is not as flexible today, is not as expansive that it can easily just expand into that space and somehow hold that. That is sort of something, after listening to all of you, what comes up for me here.
I find myself thinking about the small intestine and the act of listening, and how just the act of listening can give rise to a kind of alchemy for transformation of that resistance. Being seen and heard, Leon used to say, was very important. And I feel like when I listen to my patient and we're in resonance with each other, there's a tapping into something you can hear with your third ear, which again is another Leon Hammer phrase, and hearing not what is actually being said, but something a little deeper, and being able to use that to help with that transformation of resistance or stuckness. So I springboarded from your gallbladder to the small intestine somehow. I'm not sure how. Maybe that's the small intestine in me.
No, it's beautiful. The alchemical texts say that the chicken channels the transformation, the chi of warmth and heat into the interior of the shell by listening. And even when she's not sitting on the eggs and she's far away, that the warmth of love through attentive listening is what cultivates the embryo. And listening, I mean, I've always felt like listening, like sincere listening from the deepest place I have access to the deepest place in the patient that I can reach with that listening. That is a kind of attention that is a face of love, that is a transformative fire, because the soul just longs to be met. Like when we all got on this call tonight and we hadn't seen each other in 3 months, and then all see each other's faces, there's a natural, spontaneous arising of being met. And looking back over my own life, the people are like, remember, like my sixth grade teacher, who I'm still friends with on Facebook, he was the first person in my life I ever felt listened to me. It changed my life. Like, here was somebody who listened. He'd walk up and he'd sit down and say, "How are you doing, Lonnie?" And then he'd sit and wait for an answer. And I've always felt that in terms of treatment, this has been one of the most powerful things, and certainly in my own life. So I think you're right on it with that, Vasanthi, that listening's a conduit for the heart. And the small intestine transforms resistance through love, through listening.
Before the heart was relegated to the domain of to the tip of the tongue being the orifice, and the ears belong to the kidneys. The ears would belong to the heart. Like the earliest classics before the Neijing say, the ears are the orifice to the heart. And that character we have in so many points, men for gate, right? Like in Heart 7, Shen Men, the spirit gate is defined as listening, like that the word wen for listen, as in listening and smelling diagnosis, is the same as the gate. And so and the word for that, how it was written in the oracle bones, is a person with their hands over their ears. So you're listening deep inside. And yeah, Vasanthi, you used that word resonance, I think is beautiful, because we are waiting for that moment when our heart goes into resonance with that of the patient. And I that's definitely my experience as well, is that sense of resonance and presence, that there is nothing that cannot transform in that space, and is truly a manifestation of love, and can melt away not just the resistance of the patient that our brain always tells us is there, but our own resistance to want to open to that space and be present at that moment, I think.
You know, I think about the asking for resistance not to be there as a healer. Like, I want to help this person overcome their resistance. The resistance has to be uncomfortable for them. But the full acceptance of the resistance and not trying to make them not resistant. Just to so totally hear and take in and be with. And and fully accept that resistance. It's just not resistance any longer.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alexander.
Yeah, my sense of that is, this is part, my experience of it is, listening in this deep way that you're all bringing up. There may be resistance in the client and the patient, but in listening in this deep way, there's a listening to what? There can be a listening to that love that is already permeating through the client. And we might call this like when we're in someone's presence and we feel like their presence is disarming, is a common language. Or probably everyone on this call and many, if not all of the people listening, you'll have patients come in and be like, how come every time I come in I just start crying? Like I was fine all day and now I'm crying. And what I suspect is one of the things that is happening in the context of what people are sharing is there's that ease that you were talking about, Heiner, when you're talking about the heart and the gallbladder, that sort of, and your own experience of like, is there resistance in me? And when there's just absolutely no resistance in my experience, then what my client is expressing, I see the no resistance in the resistance. The love is already there, and then they just melt into it because they feel that listening, like, yeah, there's nothing in the way, and I'm not even going to try to tell you, like you were saying, Randine, I'm not going to say there's nothing in the way because no one wants to hear that shit. But there's something in the presence of the heart that they're just like, oh my God, and then things just melt.
Yeah, and I mean, why shouldn't there be resistance? I mean, it makes sense that it would take time for patients to learn to trust us. And they're not going to trust us more than they know and trust themselves. And if we're to guide them to know and trust themselves, we can only do that by honoring their actual condition and state as it is right here, right now, as it is, without making any problem out of it at all. I mean, to create that condition of safety within inside themselves that they may start to come to feel more comfortable opening up to their own depth. Because I mean, often we can see at a greater depth into the patient than the part of themselves they're most identified will allow them to see into themselves. And so it's really something to hold all of that in a depth of love and to see that depth and see their potential, their heart, their soul, their Buddha nature, and to be able to hold all of that compassionately in the face of ego resistance, superego resistance, just without making a problem out of it.
I just want to say that the pulse can facilitate that. And that has been a very strong thing for me. When your hand is on the pulse, there are a lot of things that you have access to that are nonverbal, a sort of a Shen-to-Shen communication. And sometimes it allows you to verbalize something that hasn't been verbalized. And it can be an opening. And it's also the power of touch, as you mentioned much earlier. The pulse is a form of touch, and it has such a strong link to the heart and the Shen.
Yes, and of course, Leon took every new patient's pulse for 40 minutes.
a minimum of 40 minutes, shall we say?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's what attracted him, I think, to the medicine. He said touch was missing in psychiatry.
Yes.
And it was very heart opening. Touch was very heart opening for him personally. But again, that resistance, which isn't maybe verbalized, can be, I don't know if the word is transcended, but through a pulse, a connection with the pulse. Because sometimes you're verbalizing something that wasn't said, and it's just an opening. At least that's what I found. And maybe it's also just the touch of the person that's signifying a form of love. You know, people experience love in different ways.
Well, it's little pulses listening.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's an active listening too. And sometimes to take that pulse and to like see what it's capable of instead of just an assessment. But say the I'm feeling some resistance in the pericardium, or whatever, and to see if just like, let's see if that's really the way it is, or if it can melt a little bit, to see if the fullness of the heart can be felt a little more. And then the pulse changes through nothing other than that inquiry of my heart coming through and touching into theirs. And so the treatment begins through that inquiring pulse, the active pulse. So what I'm first sensing is not what the actual pulse ends up being when I write it down on the paper, which also it takes that life out of it. Now I've put a diagnosis down. I've said it's this way, and that's not true. So that's my resistance when I'm stopping and saying, your pulse is wiry, without the coaxing. Is it? And maybe it is, but maybe it's not.
Yeah, there's really something to meeting what appears as resistance with a sense of there not being any problem at all.
Yeah, when I have a client who's expressing resistance they're aware of, I find it's almost as simple as saying, "Oh, and if that part of you is successful, whatever they're trying to do with this resistance, if they were successful, what do they hope would happen?" And they're like, "Oh, I'd feel safe. I'd finally feel love. I'd feel secure." All of a sudden, the enlightened intention comes right out. It's like, "Oh, so what you want is you want love. You want to feel safe. Great. Let's go do that." And then the resistance is gone. Because that knotted up energy that was like, "No, I'm not gonna share." When it's inquired and it's invited, "Oh, well, what's the direction that you would want to go if you were allowed to go that all the way?" And there's no problem. Then it flips to the enlightened intention, and then all of a sudden, there's no resistance anymore. Great, of course you want to feel safe. Great, let's feel safe together.
At the same time, what Lonnie said is, of course, is true, because why shouldn't there be a resistance when also the question is a resistance to what? Like the love space we talking about, and the heart open space in Chinese medicine language, where everything is yin and yang and heaven and earth and matter and non-matter. We are basically talking opening up to space where the heart is open as an orifice to the spirit realm, to the non-material realm. And our world is getting more materialistic or materially oriented by the minute. And so everybody is, I mean, even myself, if I go into town from living in the countryside and I haven't gone into town, I need to go to the bank and or to my dentist or something. I have my earth armor. I'm like in that kind of a space where I need to get something done in the material world. And very often it's, like the patient who comes into a Chinese medicine clinic is not they might think this is just another, mechanical adjustment or so that is happening on the earth level or so. And, the kind of not even unwillingness, but there needs to be an attention or needs to be on the radar screen that there an opening into another dimension would be beneficial for the next step or so. And there I find sort of to be myself in a space where I can sort of radiate that out, not just with touch, but also with words, like or even coming back to Vasanthi, just the listening, being present in that space where where it's palpable to the other person that you are somehow that this could potentially be more than just a transactional earth uh, business type of a thing. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, my own experience is like I can get very, very defensive. So I know there's resistance. But the difference between like who I am now and who I used to be is now when I get defensive and I see that resistance, I can see it in real time. And I can step back from it and then make connection instead of breaking connection, instead of letting identifying with the resistance and as the resistance, when it starts to rise up now, like, yeah, yeah, like I visited my parents recently and drove them, when I was 13 years old, I got out of a car with them. I said, never plan on having me in a car again for more than 90 minutes in my life. And so about a month ago, I drove an hour and a half to pick them up and drive them an hour either way to a lake so they could go swimming. And by the time we got to the end of the driveway, they criticized my driving about 27 times. So I could feel all the old stuff coming up, but from where I am, all I could do was like laugh at it. But I could see the uprising, which was the same uprising that used to result in all kind of conflict. But now I could just laugh at my own. I go, oh, look at that, and it could be kind of funny. But I can do that now. Like in general, when I feel resistance and I feel that like rising liver yang coming up, I can generally like back off it and see what's happening and then try a more creative way to connect. So, there are still parts of the self I mean, I still experience parts of the self whose fundamental attitude is get the F away from me, don't F and touch me, back the F off. I mean, it's not uncommon for me to feel that. So, I mean, that is still there, but now I can almost always see it in real time and make other choices.
So what you're saying, Lonny, is you have increased awareness of your awareness has increased.
Yes, and more freedom in relationship to parts of the self that are absolutely that are definitely reactive.
Mm-hmm. Well, what came up for me was the thought that a lot of our patients are on medication, and maybe sometimes the resistance might be that their awareness is blocked by some meds, maybe. I wonder, because particularly people who are with veterans in particular, they seem to be on a lot of meds. And I was wondering if, that blocked awareness for them, or was sometimes a little bit more difficult to.
It's interesting. I mean, I have a patient who what she does for a living is she runs a horse farm in Connecticut and works exclusively with police, firefighters, and veterans with PTSD. Just teaching them to guide the horses. And you can't pull a horse and tell a horse what to do. You have to lead it with your heart.
Mm-hmm.
And these men who are so resistant as you're saying, in standard clinical settings, get there and they melt because the horse's heart is something like 4 or 5 times bigger than a human heart. And the horses just have a vast emotional intelligence. And she says just routinely, these guys, they're just leading the horse and all of a sudden just break down. Like in a positive way, in a very vulnerable way.
I think it too depends on the type of medication. I don't want to go too far with this, but any mood altering medication, antipsychotic, anxiolytic, antidepressant, they have a dulling effect on the heart.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a dulling effect on the ability to flex, like Heiner was saying, the ability to flex to all of the life circumstances is inhibited. And so that's kind of an automatic resistance factor that's built into a lot of the medications. And I have found sometimes when somebody really is longing to heal from the depth where that wound is, and it's blanketed over by whatever antidepressant might be, the ability to get to that place feels like, I come into it and I'm bounced out. Like it's more difficult, and this might just be my perception, but it feels like that's an automatic protection that's become part of the physiology now that makes it more difficult to penetrate.
On the other hand, I mean, just to say, I find some, certainly like the antipsychotics, often create enough stability for a person to be present to connect in ways they never could if they weren't taking the substance.
I want to really appreciate that, Lonnie, because I think that's been I know when I was teaching more at Tri-State, special students will come in and say, well, this person is medicated, I can't treat them. And I have had the experience of, because I do work so much with psycho-emotional issues and really extreme anxiety, panic, insomnia. And in my studies, I remember when I was in my Gestalt training, and there was also a conversation, can we do this work if someone's, having to take medication? And one of the faculty there, it really struck me. And she said, sometimes that way of allowing a person to rest, not permanently, but to rest sufficiently. I mean, I have worked with people whose upset is so extreme and they're not sleeping for months. And we like to think, yes, the needles or the herbs, but sometimes I have seen where this, and I'm always, when people do it, they're like, should I do it? Should I do it? Oh my God. And I'm like, you can avail yourself temporarily. I mean, it shouldn't be for life, but to have the stability and to have the resource to actually begin to see that the work can help. So I could say, again, what's coming up for me as I'm listening is that the resistance, we always need to look at where, when I'm encountering the resistance, where's my resistance? And I want to just say I appreciate that we can hold the view that we don't need to even hold medication as necessarily a resist. I'm going to resist that because of the patient is using this as a crutch or a support at this time, because I know it's possible to see and feel through it if we can let ourselves go that deep. Anyway, that's my experience. I just bringing that another view in.
One of the things that's coming up as I've been listening to everybody, what's been coming up is a sense that, resistance can be looked at as a form of care, self-care. We often talk about it like, oh, they're resistant, or, maybe we'll say like they're in a protective mode, but that's an act of care. But it's often an act of care that's become disconnected from the heart. And so one of the things that I'm hearing is, sometimes meds are used in a way where it settles down the intense care in the form of mind-blowing panic. You see this sometimes with folks that have a lot of protective mechanisms, and then they maybe take some sort of, whether it's a medication or a plant medicine or something, and all of a sudden all of those sort of the forms of care that are disconnected from the heart just soften for a minute. And I can imagine that it's, maybe medication can do it, like you're describing. The love that we've been exploring, that can do it. Acupuncture, there's all these different ways that then can support that care that's disconnected from the heart to start finding reconnection with the heart, so that its capacity for care gets realigned with something that's maybe more harmonious, like, because it often goes off the rails. It's like, well, I'm trying to protect you by creating extreme panic, but now you can't sleep for weeks, and so then it doesn't actually get there. So whether we're talking about meds or a horse's heart or acupuncture or words or something, just hearing this underlying thread of like, how do we connect this care back to the heart?
So very interesting topic. What that brings up for me is that we've been talking a lot about love and the importance of that to overcome resistance. And in the ancient Chinese language, it's actually, the word for love is not what you can buy as a character that you can buy in Hong Kong printed on t-shirts, which is which is romantic love, or preferring something, liking this better, and then disliking that, but is the virtue, quote unquote, that, as Lonny first pointed out in the Bai Hu Tong, went with the wood element and with spring. And so it's the ability that we usually translate as compassion. And what it is really the power in nature to reach out and change and create and heal and touch and transform with this quality of flexibility. And I think what medication does, whether they steroids or antibiotics or oxy things, is that dulling that ability. They are stunting the love, and surgical implants are also doing the same. Like we've all seen that during the pandemic, and even now, at least in my clinic, something I see a lot is heart failure after COVID, or heart failure after vaccine, spike protein allergy reaction. And virtually everybody has come out of heart failure after a year or a year and a half, with the exception of two patients who have pacemakers implanted, because you've got this robotic thing that helps you at the moment, but then your body's ability to, right, the heart rate variability is a marker for health, and which is flexibility, and change is health. And so I, of course, couldn't agree more that everybody's on medication, particularly more seriously ill people are, and that's a reality, and that's a type of mercy, which is another translation of Zen, this term for love, is you, right, you can't just have somebody not sleep or go on some psychotic break, but in the long range, ideally, and I think that's, if I heard you right, Lorie, I agree with that. It's a merciful thing to have these tools, and for us to not be in a place of judgment. Oh, you're taking, antidepressant. Well, I'm either not going to treat you, or I have something to say about that. That's probably not a good idea, but there is, my experience is to come back where the body is in a more virginal territory there, where it's less manipulated and therefore can recover its ability to come into that space of resonance that Vasanthi was talking about earlier. It's I think, as my Latin and Greek teacher in high school always said, when it comes to translation, as literal as necessary and as free as possible. And I always tell my patients when they ask me those questions about medication and surgery, I always say, as pharmaceutical and artificial as necessary, but as natural as possible. So
I love that, Heiner, and I really appreciate that. I think that what you touched on the place, it's like when to open that sense of mercy, and then through that, I feel like we support people in being able to let go of that, whatever the to move them away from the pharmaceutical intervention, but without the judgment or the resistance to the person because of it. I mean, I think that was what I used to feel, working a lot with first year students coming in with this idea like, oh, I can't, then we can't treat them then. And to say, in a way, it's our work to not even resist that, to be able to see through that, and then keep supporting with. But I love what you said, that it's to move as more quickly and as fully as possible to natural.
It's interesting we're talking about wood a lot, because I think part of the resistance, what we experience as resistance, is the patient's failure to either to be able to or to allow themselves to envision who they would be without their pathology. And of course, the liver is the envisioning capacity. The Huntra can travel into the future, see the future self. And I think a big part of our compassion is being able to embrace the patient's potential and intuit that part of themselves that is striving to emerge. And the thing is that we can't, and nobody ever can, offer any guarantees or tell the person what their life is going to look like after they've let go of that pain or that dysfunction that they're attached to. And so it's a step that everybody essentially has to take based on faith and trust for themselves. And so I think it's imperative, one, that we've done that ourselves for ourselves, and also that we can hold the person in a big enough space and big enough compassion and in a doubtlessness about their capacity to take that step beyond whatever their current condition is. It's a death. It's really not less than a death. And so it makes sense that the part of themselves that has held on to these, that has survived through these, what has now become dysfunction, through originally what, as Alexandra said, what were compensations that have now become dysfunctions. If that's all they know themselves as, there's going to be terror and perhaps a lack of capacity to envision what things would look like. And no one can offer a guarantee. It's a step beyond into the unknown, into a mystery. And I have found for myself that being able to hold all that in love with a doubtless confidence in the goodness of the mystery, in the goodness of the direction of it, has helped create the conditions where people can arrive at that place in themselves where they're more willing to take that step into the unknown.
With every curse, so to speak, I mean, these behaviors which serve survival mechanisms and are no longer needed, there are gifts, there are silver linings, there are gifts that have come from that, and sometimes illuminating or helping to illuminate or acting as a mirror and shining it back, whether it's taken literally or it's the seeing, I feel, that leads to some transformations, not under my control or somebody else's control, but it allows for that movement towards wholeness. I don't know if I'm making sense, but seeing between the spaces what the gifts are in those misbehaviors, I'm going to call them, but what's holding us, what's no longer necessary for us, can often shine a light that is transformative.
Yeah, if whatever is used to take one out of their, pathologic state or whatever is causing them disturbance or pain or suffering, and put them into, an in-between space, whatever that is a step along the way. But the void is not the destination. We don't put them in the in-between space because, like, at least you're not a problem to yourself here. Let's keep you there. Like, no, this is a kind and compassionate place to hang out till maybe the Han comes back online and then can start envisioning a different way of being.
Yes, I think that's well stated.
There's one thing that kind of I've been really sitting with from the beginning, and now as we begin to talk about the void, it's coming back, which is the question of time. Because I'm aware that I feel there's almost like a connection between a kind of mental idea about linear time and resistance. Because if we are not in time, there's no resistance. And in the void, as you're saying, Randine, we enter a space where there's no time. We can rest there. And so I want to come back to Leon's statement, because right from the beginning, I feel like I knew Leon way long ago, long before he started practicing Chinese medicine, when he was still getting people to punch pillows out in Springs on Long Island. And I punched pillows with Leon. And when he says, I think resistance is just a way that psychoanalysts, keep their patients there to make more money. I mean, I was laughing, of course. But what comes to me is that's only true if I think it's the patient is at fault. If I'm going to say, oh, it's my patient who's resisting, and I'm going to keep pointing the finger at this nasty, stubborn patient who won't do what I think they should do, and then we just keep hacking away at that, that could go on a long time. But the whole thing about time for me is very present, because on the other hand, I can resist by wanting to get the patient better already. And I have done that. Like, whoa, I'm bored with this, and I'm ready and I'm even sick of treating this person because they're so resistant. But if I can, and a patient came at me one time about that. I might have even talked about it once, because I was like, I think it's time maybe we should find someone else for you to work with, because you're just not getting better, and it's a year and I don't see she looked at me and she said, stop rushing me. And that was a big learning for me about time. Because sometimes it takes 10 years before a person even shows the slightest sign. And like you've been at it and at it and at it, and 10 years later, there's this amazing thing happens. I just felt like I needed, before we closed, before it was time to stop.
Might be 10,000 lifetimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Till you said that in the treatment room that day.
Yeah. And from the timeless, like you're pointing to, Lorie, from the timeless, there's no problem with that. Some traditions talk about that timeless awareness as perfectly stainless. Nothing sticks. It's perfectly stainless. And so I'm experiencing that as you're speaking. And also it brings up this thing that always makes me laugh when I walk down the street and I hear someone yelling at their dog for barking. And I'm like, you're both barking, right? Like, come on. And so, as you're talking about, I love how you're sort of talking about these two things that are like, one's like really concrete. It's like the practitioner is barking at their client for being resistant. And they're being so resistant. They're like, hurry up. What the hell? And everybody's, both of them are expressing a form of resistance. That's both, I would say, an act of care. Why do we get pissed off? Why do we get annoyed at our clients when they're not changing or doing the thing? It's because we care. Why aren't they changing? Because that resistance in them cares. And then all of that is nested in this, it's arising in this timelessness. It's like, yeah, maybe we've been at this for, 10,000 lifetimes. We've been unfolding, evolving, like that's what we're doing. But, every human moment, everything feels so urgent, It seems to be part of what keeps things moving.
and still there's the practical. A patient comes, I do an intake. I present my entire view candidly of what I think's I've sat with them for 45 minutes or an hour. I've taken their pulse for 30, 40 minutes. Then I sit there for 20 minutes and lay out everything and say, this is what I see. This is my intention. And we've gone over every possible, why are you here? What do you want? What's your intention? And then when I say, okay, this is how we create the circumstances in which you can realize that goal, then part of them says, yeah, well, I wasn't really serious. Or, yeah, I do want the, the best example I ever had was a patient I did an intake on. I came in the next day, and on my answering machine is a message from him. He was in his mid-70s. This was 20 years ago, 25 years ago. So I was 42. He was in his mid-70s. And he leaves a message and he says, Lonny, I've been doing healing for 35, 40 years. This was the most profound session I ever had. I felt totally met. You really listened to me. I am so excited to be working with you. I can't wait to come in on Monday or Tuesday. And I said, so he came in the next week for the first session where I was going to do needles. And he walked in and we walked into the treatment room and sat down. I said, that was an absolutely beautiful message that you left me on my answering machine. I was really touched by that. And he said, before we get started, there's something I have to say. And we need to be clear about this. And I said, sure, what? He said, I don't want to go too quickly. I want to make sure we take this really slow. And I looked at him and said, oh, how slow would you like to take this? And he lay down on his stomach. I tapped one needle into bladder 13 to tap it 1 millimeter to tap AE, which is a very superficial. You tap it in through the tube and take the tube off, and it's gone in maybe 1 millimeter. And I put it in, and he screamed, I can't feel the left half of my body. And I said, that's interesting. And I tapped in the next one, and he said, I can't move. And then started screaming, take them out, take them out. I took them out. It was, in quotes, needle shock. And he threw on his clothes and he said, I can't do this. And he ran out of the building. I mean, that, and just the conclusion of the story is 20 years later, stopped me on the street, said, you're Lonny Jarrett, right? I said, yes. He goes, I'm so-and-so. Do you remember me? I said, yes. And he opens up his bag and said, I just wrote this book. Would you mind putting some in your waiting room to sell to your patients? So there is something going. So there is something going on. There is a there can be a colossal. The heart comes through. The heart on the phone message was all love and all care, and can't wait to get going. That's one part of the self. And then there was another part that said, there's no effing way I'm ever going to let that other part. And that I'm going with that. So there was a gross dichotomy. That's between two parts of the self, a chasm between them. But we can hold that. I can hold that whole thing in love, and I don't have to be the one. I can have compassion for his suffering, and I can hold that all over lifetimes, knowing that there was certainly a dimension of himself who received all the love that was being held in the treatment rooms. I know that part's there, that's generous and has gratitude. But it's all very interesting to me, and I personally, I'm just interested in the whole thing. Because there is a force. I mean, it's my experience, both within myself and my patients, that when I put my stake in the ground to be free and to live up to the highest that I'd seen in my life, I experienced all the forces in the universe that supported that lining up, both externally in my life and within myself, lining up to support me. And then I saw every force of resistance in myself and externally in my life that was against my choice to give myself to the best part of myself. And then there was a choice between the two. So I maybe this comes down to a discussion, and maybe it's a discussion we'll have sometime, is there good, is there evil?
Well, in this particular instance, we were talking about the virtues before, and what you just said, this is super interesting example there, brought to mind the virtue of zhi that's stored in the kidneys, and the way how the Wang Feng Yi practitioners, these emotional healers in northern China, interpret that is that's what you just said, which is this: you are setting an intention to change your life and then you're sticking to it. That is, it's like literally you're writing it into your bone marrow, and then come rain or hellfire, it's not going to change. And there is, of course, just like some people have weak kidney yin or yang or something, you know, then that's the element of time that Lorie was mentioning, that today I'm absolutely certain that this is how it is. And then tomorrow it's something different, entirely different emotional space, different. And I'm probably overall too German to fully understand that those kind of quick changes, because it takes me a long time. I'm definitely, when it comes to resistance, it's more like I see myself mirrored in the patient, because I usually have compassion for that, because I'm usually there myself, because it's resistance to live in life in a heart open way that is constantly there, right? Because we are, you feel, go vacation, or you're in love, or you had a good conversation and you were just on cloud nine, or you could even say I'm tasting enlightenment, but that is not, unfortunately, a space where you then remain forever, because then you sleep, or something happens, or it's just a different energetic phase that the universe is in, and everything is all of a sudden different and closed again. And that's for us, and then that's like that for the patient as well. It's just, for some people it's more dramatic and faster, and for some people it's less dramatic and slower.
Yeah, what comes up for me is, as I'm hearing both of you, this interesting thing of this, commitment to love, or commitment to our true nature, or something about how orienting to that as a center brings up all of the aspects of us that are cut off from it and therefore get activated, which then gives the opportunity for embracing all of those things. To me, this is compassion. It's embracing that suffering until the suffering itself is transmuted, whether it's my patient's suffering or my own, which really that dichotomy doesn't exist. But as suffering is arising in me, because I've put a stake in the ground, whether, it's that timeless awareness or the loving emanations from it. And then I suppose at some point if we do that enough, there's just less and less stuff that comes up in resistance until there's only one thing left.
Mhm.
And then there's nothing to put a stake into.
Yeah. I in listening to you both and Heiner particularly, I started to feel, and you'll probably recognize this is one of my themes, but that resistance is actually part of embodiment. That, like you said, we have those moments, Heiner, where we feel that love or that enlightenment or that amazing conjunctio of connection with another. And then because we're in bodies, we're in matter, we get plunged back into that form that has resistance. And one of the things I just want to say this, I've come to when I'm talking about this, either to patients or students, I've really come to look at resistance like the alchemical lead. And just like the alchemists would cherish the lead, because within the lead is everything we've been talking about, is the gold, is the compassion, is the enlightenment. But that's why we come into these bodies, so we can work with this lead that contains the sparks, where the Shen has actually gone down in and buried itself, so we can bring it back to life through our own being, our virtues, our putting our stake in the ground for that.
Yeah, I mean, what comes is that resistance is relative, but love is absolute.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Right.
And it's that full presence that's the gateway between the two, that takes it out of time, takes it out of space, takes it out of the three-dimensional limitations, takes it out of time and into the dimension of love that penetrates through all of it, which is the timeless, deathless, stainless. And then I, think of resistance to death as resistance to life.
Seems like a good place to end. That was beautiful. Well, we'd all like to thank the listeners for engaging with us and look forward to your comments. And look forward to our next encounter together and with you.